you did say on Rogan, my Iranian guests tell me there's a 12-ish Shia Islam and they're messianic and they want to bring about the end of the world. That's not true. I'm a Shia Muslim. I'm telling you, Shia Muslim is not messianic. I mean, it is messianic in that we expect a Messiah to come just like Christians, a Mehdi. But there's no evidence that Shias in Iran are trying to bring about the end of the world, and that's why they want nuclear weapons. So that anti-immigration, I agree. Look at the polling, was definitely a problem. Right now, look at the polling right now, a year into Trump. They're more pro-immigration than the American public's been for decades. Support for immigration is now, I think, near record highs. Why? Because Trump went the other extreme. And now they're not thinking about the Biden era. They're looking at ICE agents shooting people in the street. They're hearing horrific stories of their friend's grandmother being pulled from her garden while gardening by masked agents of the state. So actually the Democrats are in a very, very strong position on this issue now because Trump has been so typically fascistically extreme that actually the immigration issue is now, I know you mentioned earlier, like talk about the border, not interior. It's actually all about the interior now. It's all about ICE. It's all about, Stephen Miller and his white supremacist rhetoric and this, this plan to make America white again. The White House put out a post, one of these memes, the Department of Homeland Security, saying 100 million deportations. Think about that. That's insane. 100 million deported would mean US citizens are getting deported. People like me are getting deported. People who are born here are getting deported. That's just insane. So that's turned the American public actually against what the administration is doing. It actually made them much more positive about immigration. And as the economy tanks further, I think you'll see a lot of businesses also remembering the virtues and values of immigration. So look, there is a problem. I don't deny that. But, when we talk about the public, we also have to accept that the media plays a big role in this, right? A lot of what the people think about immigration. My favorite poll when I lived in the UK, there was polling done in the UK, I think by Gallup. In their lived experiences, they're not seeing gang members on their streets. They don't have immigrants causing them problems. But they hear from the Daily Express and the Daily Mail and Tory politicians and now reform politicians that it's a huge problem nationally. Same thing in the US. You ask Americans what proportion of the country is migrant or Muslim. They give you massive percentages because they think that immigrants have taken over the country. You're in the US. Ask Republicans. I'm sure you're interviewing prominent Republicans. Ask them about Muslims in the UK. They think Muslims run the UK. They think London has fallen to an Islamic caliphate, right? This is the kind of insane rhetoric that Elon Musk pumps with his algorithms. So I do think a lot, when you talk to me about public opinion, I think public opinion is something you should change. I don't think politicians should just blindly follow public opinion. They should lead. And one of the things Donald Trump was able to do is get his entire base to switch their views on Russia, switch their view on tariffs and free trade. That's what Democrats should aspire to do. Try and change people's hearts and minds.
I agree with you. But the problem is for me, is going to be, are they going to put together a coherent package to actually make that happen? And are they going to prioritize economics? Because to me, if you want to win this election, you focus on economics, particularly.
It's very hard for me to say what you focus on 3 years out. We don't know what the biggest issue. I mean, in 2017, if you had said to me, Trump's unpopular, Democrats just lost with Clinton, what should they focus on in 2020? And if I'd said to you, they should focus on a virus from China, you would have said, don't be silly.
Yeah. Well, I remember we had a guest on the show, actually very much to your point about how Joe Biden won because of COVID. We asked him who's on course to win before COVID happened. And he said, if nothing changes, and it will, then blah, 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 blah. So I agree with you. Mehdi, before we go to Substack and ask you questions, we always ask the same question to all our guests at the end, but I want to ask you about one other thing before we do that. In the time, we've been here for a couple of weeks now, in the time that we've been here, there have been 4, I don't know if you necessarily describe them as, maybe I think they were 4 terrorist attacks committed by what we understand to be an Islamist. Do you see that as part of, you talked about blowback, do you see that as it?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's very worrying. It's one of the things that keeps me up at night. I think the more we see that, the more we're going to see real fractured relations in communities. Islamophobia right now is already off the charts in the Republican Party. They're looking for any excuse. I don't know if you've seen the tweets from Andy Ogle saying Muslims are not part of American society.
I didn't see that. No.
This is a Republican congressman who said Muslims are not welcome in America.
And there's another
not
one.
Islamists.
And there's another one he keeps tweeting.
There's a guy called Randy Fine.
Yeah.
He said if I had to choose between dogs and Muslims, I'd choose dogs.
Yeah.
So there's some real. I mean, if you talk to Muslims who lived here after 9/11, I didn't, I moved here in 2015, but if you talk to Muslims in my wife's family, friends of mine, they will say the Islamophobia now is much worse than after 9/11. After 9/11, George Bush went to a mosque and said Islam's peace. Donald Trump would never do that. And so in a climate of Islamophobia, of course, Muslims, any self-identified Muslim who carries out an act of terror against a synagogue or against a university or whatever it is of course, it's going to be morally wrong and a criminal act. But it's going to be a real disaster for community relations, for the political debate, for some of these cultural issues we talked about. I don't know what is motivating all these people. It's very hard to say. The guy who attacked the synagogue in Michigan recently, there's reporting that his 2 brothers were killed, their kids were killed.
They were 2 Hezbollah people,
That's
right?
what some people say not. We don't have a confirmation. Different media outlets. Some say Hezbollah, some say no. We don't know. But clearly he may have been, it sounds like he was pissed, right, about what happened in Lebanon. That doesn't justify what he did, but that sounds like there. There was another attack that same day or week in Virginia on a college campus from a guy who had been linked to ISIS, who had been released from prison. Again, don't know, because people say he was mentally ill. Muslims, we always joke that we don't get to be mentally ill, right? It's only the white mass shooter who gets to be mentally. Muslims, we never have any mental illness in our community. We're just all Islamists. But look, this is a country with a lot of violence, right? Gun violence is a thing of norm. Mass shooters are. So the night we went to war with Iran, there was an attack on an Austin bar. There was a mass shooting. That also is believed, some people are reporting, I don't have links. But when that story first came out, most people just shrugged and said, oh, another mass shooting in a bar. It's just normal in this country. And then you throw in the political or religious angle, then it becomes a big news story.
I think, to be fair, and I mean, your point about mentally ill, I haven't heard a Muslim be described as someone who had real mental illness.
No, there's a famous Family Guy meme.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. But on the other hand, I also think that if you have a white guy and there's any connection to white supremacy, that also gets amplified, right?
Sometimes.
So when a mass
if you look at the studies, actually, not really. It's like 8-to-1 ratio of like how much we talk about the motivations and religion of a Muslim shooter versus a white shooter. There's been a lot of studies done.
Well, the point I was going to make is if someone is wearing a T-shirt saying property of Islam, or if someone is a member of ISIS, or if someone expresses allegiance to...
I'm agreeing with you. It's bad for Muslims.
Well, let me just finish. So if someone expresses those views, it would be natural for us to talk about that. Likewise, if someone expressed white supremacist beliefs while committing a shooting, like the guy in New Zealand or whatever.
Or the people who attacked the Capitol, who Donald Trump pardoned on day one. Many of them wore Camp Auschwitz T-shirts, carried Confederate flags.
Right. And people focused on that. So, right?
I apologize.
So my point is, the reason I asked you about this is obviously something that we have had to deal with in Europe extensively.
Yes.
And it feels to me, I don't think it's being talked about in this way here in the US, but it feels to me like it's coming to the US. Do you agree?
I worry that you may be right. Especially
why is that? Like,
I mean, I don't want to make it all about blowback because it's not. But you can't. I mean, correlation is not causation. But I was a MSNBC anchor for 3.5 years. I can count on. I did two weekly shows. Sometimes I used to do a nightly show. I can count on one hand, the fingers on one hand, how many times I talked about ISIS or Al Qaeda. Not because I was ignoring the story. It wasn't a big story. It went away. We would stop talking about it. We were only talking about the far right and white supremacists because the FBI said that was the biggest threat to the homeland. We'd just seen an insurrection. We kept arresting nut jobs who wanted to, militia members who wanted to blow shit up, who thought COVID was a way of this government taking over, all of this stuff, right? So I think people got complacent, certainly in my community, thinking, nobody thinks Muslims are terrorists anymore. There aren't any Muslim terrorists anymore. Now, as you say, there does seem to be an uptick. Is that to do with Donald Trump becoming president? Is that to do with the war in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza? I know we haven't talked about it today, but US intelligence warned Biden in year one of the genocide that this will be a generational recruiting event for Islamist and jihadist groups around the world. This will be a threat to the United States. Obviously, I don't need to be an intelligence member to say that. It's just common sense. If people spend 2 years watching a Gaza genocide, some people, some more unhinged people, some more extreme people will say, I want to take revenge. I want to blow shit up.
Well, why is that? I mean, I don't see the same being done by Russians or Ukrainians who've also had to deal with various things, who might blame Americans for something or whatever. Why is that?
I'm not sure that's a good analogy. For example, Ukraine, I mean, why would a Ukrainian feel the need to go blow themselves up in Russia when they have an army that's fighting Russia and killing Russians?
In America, they might say, America, didn't give us the help they need, or the Russians say, we're at war with you. Why doesn't that happen?
Live is not the same as America arming and funding a genocide in Gaza for 2.5 years on our phones.
Take the Russian example. The narrative in Russia, I know this because I have family and I follow what's happening in Russia. The narrative in Russia is we're at war with America. Yeah, I don't see Russians blowing themselves up or throwing nail bombs or shooting people in bars up and down America.
I think because they think that they can do the damage they're doing in Ukraine. I mean, this is the difference. And you could say the same thing about Jewish people and Israel. Well, they have an army that's bombing Gaza. Look, I'm not saying some crazy theory. This is something that's been testified to by history. Take Sri Lanka, for example. The people who invented suicide bombings were not Muslim. The Tamil Tigers perfected it as a mass weapon, right? That was people who believed they were under occupation by Sinhalese, right? So and Robert Pape, who is an expert on suicide terrorism, has talked about this. There's a clear link between foreign occupations and foreign wars and suicide terrorism, in particular suicide terrorism. But look, is there a problem where certain Muslim groups are exploiting political conflicts? Yes, I spent 20 years opposing jihadists and Islamists and pointing out that there is no justification in Islam for this kind of violence. But, explaining something is not the same as justifying it. I don't justify what they do. I think it's reprehensible, but I understand how they work and the mindsets and how they, and this guy in Michigan is an example of that. I don't agree with what he did. He's probably mentally unbalanced, but people say, well, what would you do if you lost your family? Well, I wouldn't go attack a synagogue, but that's people act in an unhinged way after tragedies happen in their lives. That's not to justify it. Is it going to get worse? I hope not, but again, violence begets violence. We've seen that in Palestine. We've seen that with Hamas, right? Who knows what's going to come out of Gaza?
But isn't that the exact logic that justifies America bombing the out of Afghanistan after 9/11?
It doesn't justify it, but it explains it. For the Bible or Christianity, I would say they did it because they got attacked and they wanted to attack back and make a show of force and do whatever they want to do. Doesn't mean I justify it. I didn't agree with the war in Afghanistan, but I understand it. What we refuse to do with our opponents and our enemies, especially the Muslim ones, is try and understand the mindset. We don't try and understand why Iran's doing what it's doing, why Hamas is doing what it's doing, why Hezbollah is doing. You don't have to agree with it, but they're not all crazy people. They actually have their own strategy. But some people suggest, they're all just messianic people. You did say, Constantine, so I'm going to bring this up because I watched you on Rogan. You did say on Rogan, my Iranian guests tell me there's a 12-ish Shia Islam and they're messianic and they want to bring about the end of the world. That's not true. I'm a Shia Muslim. I'm telling you, Shia Muslim is not messianic. I mean, it is messianic in that we expect a Messiah to come just like Christians, a Mehdi. But there's no evidence that Shias in Iran are trying to bring about the end of the world and that's why they want nuclear weapons. So that kind of thinking is not helpful.
I was quoting specific people.
Yeah, they're wrong, I'm telling you.
Well, they're wrong. I'm only quoting them. And I think I made it clear that some people say that. I'm not, I think we had this conversation with someone else the other day. I'm not convinced of this idea that they want nuclear weapons and the first nuclear weapon they get, they're going to drop it on Tel Aviv. Insane. I'm not convinced about that. I think there are some people who...
By the way, Israel has nukes. Can I just remind, we haven't said that in this whole conversation. Israel illegally has nukes.
You keep throwing stuff in that's not
relevant to the conversation. It is relevant. Come on, we spent an hour, half of the talk talking about Iran's nuclear program. Mehdi, I forgot to point out to the viewers, Mehdi, Israel has nukes.
Mehdi, when we had Yossi Cohen, who was the former head of Mossad, I literally made a joke which exposed the fact that Israel has nukes. Of course, everyone knows Israel has nukes. No one denies it here, right? But what we've done here is we've derailed the conversation we're actually having. The point I was making is, I suspect Iran wants nuclear weapons for the same reason that any country would want them, as we talked about earlier. Anyway, appreciate you coming on.
Okay, thank you for having me. Thanks for the conversation.
Thanks for your time.
Apologies for confusing you both. You look so similar.
You're more offended by that.
I don't know who's more offended by that.
We're both offended by that.
Yeah. Final question is always the same, Mehdi. What's the one thing we're not talking?
There's a study that came out of King's a couple of months ago that said when AI was asked to resolve various conflicts, in 9 out of 10 cases, it said, use nukes.
I mean, it's more effective.
It's how a machine would think.
I grew up watching Terminator 2, so I worry about Skynet all the time.
Yeah,
no, I think AI is insane, and I think...
in war especially.
Well, and actually, before you get to the nuclear thing, I mean, they are already talking about the next phase is autonomous drones. And I think it's terrifying.
The school in Iran, there's a lot of reporting that suggests that was hit because of AI.
Really?
The Minas.
It was right next to a military base, wasn't it?
But it's the AI that didn't do the sufficient checking. I'm not sure, but that's what's been reported.
I mean, historically speaking, civilian objects next to military facilities always get hit in war, tragically.
A lot of American schools on a lot of American military bases, we wouldn't allow.
No, of course. Well, obviously, it's terrible that it happened.
But AI is doing, and in Israel and in Gaza, something we didn't talk about, AI was used to kill a lot of innocent Palestinians with a 10% error rate. The Israelis admit this. It's like 1 in 10 of the AI attacks they accepted was maybe not a militant, but he did it.